You're listening to the A Lot Alike podcast, a podcast created for the overwhelmed entrepreneur to feel safe, seen, and supported through conversations around the not so common topics in business. My name is Miranda Joyner, a former radio personality turned podcaster. I'm a brand consultant, author, and speaker, and the co-founder of Succeed and Elevate, an organization dedicated to helping small business owners overcome burnout. In this podcast, we have candid conversations about the everyday struggles that entrepreneurs face and the real no-fluff solutions to help us overcome them. Good morning, and welcome to A Lot Alike, the podcast. My name is Miranda Joyner, and I am your guide today on this episode. And I'm really excited to get into it. Really excited that you're back with me for another episode. And before we get into all the good, let me just get it out the way. Look, follow me on YouTube. Follow me on wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe. Follow me on social media. Send me an inbox. Let me know what you think about these episodes and about these conversations. Let me know if it's something you want me to talk about and chat about when it comes to your mental and emotional health or just being a better human being in this world, or just anything, any thoughts that you have. I would love to hear from you. So follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm in all the places, Miranda Joyner. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, okay? It's the difference between following and hitting subscribe. So subscribe on YouTube for me. Do me that favor. I appreciate it. Listen, today, I'm kind of excited about this episode. And I'm not going to name the episode in this conversation because sometimes I listen to these episodes after I'm done and I think, man, I think this title is very fitting. But I know what I want to convey in this episode today. And what I want to convey is, one, the big misconception that people have about introverts, because I've run into so many of them. I think there's a misconception and a stigma that we put on people who are introverts. And I want you to walk away with, as an introvert, if you're listening to this, maybe you're listening as an introvert, I want you to have some tools that you can use to help you to manage how you communicate and show up in spaces and feel less overwhelmed and less anxious. Now, if you're watching this because you either know an introvert that maybe you're in a relationship with, maybe you're someone like me that has a kid that has an introverted personality, or maybe you are a person that has employees or people you have to deal with on a regular basis that are introverts, and you're looking for some insight, I'm going to give it to you. Now, let me be clear. I'm not a freaking introvert, okay? I'm not. But at times, especially post-COVID, I started to wonder if I was slowly conforming to an introvert. But I think there are some behaviors sometimes for me that kind of give introverted characteristics, or maybe sometimes when I go into spaces, my personality can show up in that way. But overall, I think for the most part, I am an extroverted human being. I have to be around people. I love to be in spaces, and I get my energy from exterior people and their energy. Now, I do have to reset, and we're going to get into all that and what that looks like, but that's what this episode is about. It's for the introverted person, and it's for tips for them. So let's get into it. One of the first things that I want to talk about is the idea that being an introvert is a bad thing. I really want to think about defining and really clarifying what an introvert is. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. When you think about an introvert, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When you think about a person that you consider to be an introvert, whether it's somebody you know or whether it's you, what are the list of characteristics that pop up in your head? I'm going to pause for a minute. I want to know. Shy. Maybe you thought low self-esteem. Maybe you thought insecure. Maybe you thought anxiety. Maybe you thought imposter syndrome. Maybe you thought doesn't like to do public speaking, doesn't like to hold conversations, doesn't like small talk, doesn't want to be in a room full of people having conversations, maybe gets anxiety about going to parties, going out, talking to other people. And if all these things popped in your head and you thought, man, that's an introvert, or maybe you thought the person in class or the kid in class that never raises their hand or says anything, or when you ask them something, they get all quiet and they retreat to being within and kind of drawn back, or maybe they fumble over their words. Were those things that you thought about? Okay. So here's the funny thing about thinking about all those things as an introvert is that I can think of extroverts that have those same characteristics. Imposter syndrome, gets anxiety, doesn't like to do public speaking, doesn't want to be in a room full of people having meaningless conversations. So ultimately, I think the stigmas that we put on introverts tend to be a negative thought, a negative idea about who they are. And a lot of times, in a lot of settings, whether it's in school settings, because I thought about this with my son, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but in school settings and also maybe in places of employment or just in general, a lot of times people are trying to get introverted people to be more open, more conversational, give us more, smile more, talk more, be more communicative, right? So and they do that in a way of almost looking at introverts as if it's a negative thing. And I think that it is fine time, especially for me being an extrovert who has a son that has introvert tendencies, to look at their strengths and who they are as a person instead of trying to change them and convert them to being something that they're absolutely not. Because whether you believe it or not, I know this world pushes us to be forefront. We have to be taking selfies and we're, always on the camera and always on the go and talk to people and move and go get what you want in life and learn how to communicate and go in a room and dominate the room, right? We live in that world that pushes that narrative on us all the time. But contrary to popular belief, there is such a benefit to the person that pulls back and observes a room, that can pick up on conversation, that can have a full thought process about things before they open up their mouths to speak. There's so much power in someone who's super observant and intuitive and can tap into people in a room and look at things and assess things from a pull back, drawn back perspective. And I think introverts make great leaders, but I think so often we overlook them and their superpowers to be able to do that. So if you've ever thought about an introvert and it crossed your mind to think, oh, I think it's something wrong with them, they should be, as soon as that sentence comes out your mouth, I just want you to stop. Okay. I think they should be exactly who they are. So you're talking to somebody who has a kid, like I said. I think I've considered myself an extrovert for the majority of my life. I've always been a very talkative person. And believe it or not, I really like to be behind the scenes. I can be on camera and do this, but I also love being behind the scenes, watching a thing come to life. I've always felt that I was very good with people. My mom was a teacher for 33 years. And as a kid in elementary, she would always put me in plays. I was always on stage doing something. Okay. My mom was always creatively coming up with these things for the school in elementary that I went to that she was a teacher's aide at. And she would put me in everything she could. So I got a lot of practice in that. And then when I had my kid, I remember, I will never forget this. And I tell this story with him. I'll never forget it. He was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And there was this talent agency that had come to the city and they were looking for kids to like pull and recruit to maybe be in like Disney shows. Now, my kid, who granted, when he would be at school, he would be super quiet. Like the teachers were like, he never hardly says a word, but he's the best kid. He's going to make sure that other people are doing what they should. And then when this kid would get in the car with me, he would be talking 90 to nothing, right? He gets around my mom and my grandmother and his dad and his brothers, and he's talkative, right? But in other spaces, he was very reserved. And when we were in public, when he was a toddler, he would be right here by my side. He wasn't the type of kid that was running everywhere. But anyway, I took him to this talent agency because I thought, man, my kid has such a funny personality, because what I knew about my kid was that when he did talk at home, he was hilarious. And he still is. He's really funny, really insightful and really funny. But he would tell these jokes, or he spent his entire childhood trying to scare me. Every time I would come pick him up from my mom's house, he would jump to hide and try to jump out and scare me. He was just such a colorful kid. And so I was thinking, man, The world should see this. So I took my kid to this audition, room full of kids. It was a ton of people in the building. And I can't remember, honestly, if I prepped him to tell him exactly what we were doing. But we get to the place and it was our turn to walk up to the table to talk to the person. And all my son had to do was say his name and his age. You would have thought that my kid forgot how to speak, okay? He was so frozen up by all the things and the elements that were happening that he wouldn't even darn near say his name and his age. And I think it was that moment that I realized, oh, this is a part of and a core part of your personality, that you and I don't have this part in common. And so instead of me trying to shape him to be something that he was, at this point, it was my job, I felt, to just figure out how to help him to understand his own personality and how to maximize his strengths with those things that he does. And so I spend a lot of time, even now as a, with him as a teenager, I spend a lot of time highlighting to him and making him aware of the parts of his personality that are unique, that are worth admiring. The fact that he's so intuitive, the fact that he's so in tune with other people's feelings, the fact that he's so insightful and sensitive to the energy of people around him. And it's because he's observant, right? Because he takes time to preserve his energy, right? It's because he takes time to pull back and not always being, talking and always, being quick and the first to say something, or quick on his feet with words. That is not necessarily a bad thing, that he needs a second to really think through what he wants to say and how he wants to say it. Now, don't get it twisted. I know that undoubtedly, just like on both sides, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that if there's going to be negative things, right? And I say negative, I don't want to give it such a negative, label, but I know there are things that can be challenging, right, about being an introvert, that sometimes you're too in your head, right? Sometimes the narrative in your head is too loud and you're more critical of yourselves. But again, these things are true, can be true, whether you're introverted or extroverted. So these are just very common things that we all deal with because we're a lot more alike than we are different, right? So I want you to consider that as you think about the people in your life that are extroverts. The next time you're finding yourself having short patience, whether it's with your kid or with your friends or with your coworkers, to stop pushing them, because honestly, the pushing is not going to change who they are at their core. Same way, pushing you to be something you're not is not going to change who you are at your core, right? One thing that I think is a very dividing factor about introverts and extroverts, and I'm going to get to the part of this where I want to give some tips about how introverts can manage. I want to give like a couple of categories about that. But before I get to that, I want to talk very briefly about energy, because energy is a big, big, big part of big part of how we manage our personalities, whether we're introverted, extroverted, or ambiverted, right? I think I said that right. So whether we're either one of those, managing your energy is just a very common thing that can help on any side of the scale. But one thing that I know to be true, and as I was kind of digging around and doing research and thinking about ways in which I want to talk about extroverts, because I have a workshop coming up where I'm doing networking for extroverts, right? Or relationship building for extroverts, because I found that so many business owners and small business owners were introverted people that really struggle with communicating and have anxiety around that. So because of that, when I was doing my research, I realized that there is a very interesting difference between extroverts and introverts. And when we think about introverts, we often associate them hard with anxiety. We just think that an anxious person is an introverted person, and that's just really not true. So detaching from that stigma of really looking at how you define an introverted person, like even in the dictionary, it defines a person as being shy and pulled in. And I think sometimes I present myself as a shy person in certain spaces, in certain situations. So how true is that? But one of the better definitions that I heard, or explanations about the difference between the two, is that someone who is introverted is getting their energy from within, from times of being alone, from internal things that recharge and refuel them so that they can show up in spaces and places. And an extroverted person is fueling and getting their energy from exterior things, like I was saying earlier, like how I can be in spaces and be fueled by people's energy. How, for instance, when I want to work on my laptop, or as an entrepreneur, when I'm not wanting to work in an office space, for me, being in an office space by myself after a while, I have to get out. I have to be around people. I have to be in a coffee shop or spaces where I can see other people and have a minimum amount of engagement and interaction so that creatively I can produce. I need that. It charges and fuels me. Whereas my son during COVID, listen, he could have cared less if we ever left the house again. I'm convinced of it. And even though COVID isn't happening, he still can spend an entire week, honestly, or more in the house and never leave the house, never have a desire to leave the house. Sometimes I'm like, hey, don't you want to go with me here or there or do this? And he's like, nah, I'm good. And, it's really interesting because as a parent, you sometimes you're on that fence of trying to figure out, okay, how normal is this? But I know I talk to other parents and they share these same sentiment about their kids. And I think what's happened is there is a huge shift in how people socialize, right? So the way that these generations behind us, the way that they socialize and connect is a far cry from how we were connecting when we were younger. We were outside, skinned knees, bikes in the street, in the heat, till the sun, went down and the street light came on. But these kids, they're more into their phone, communicating in different ways. And so it's creating different behaviors in them. And so as a parent, you're always concerned about what's the borderline of their personality, and then how much of this is societal, and then how much of this is healthy even, right? But with him, I'm coming to realize that I think this is just his personality, that he just prefers to be by himself and chilling. And when it's time to socialize, when my family comes over, when we have family gatherings, he's super present, super helpful. At his job, he is a stellar employee, and people describe him as such. And so at the end of the day, you have to look at these overall things and look at patterns and assess the whole thing instead of targeting in on a person who might be introverted, right? This kind of sounds like it's more of for people who struggle with connecting to introverts, but really, I want this episode to be for introverts. So, with that being said, I want to talk about some ways, if you are an introvert listening to this and you've gotten this far, I want to talk about some ways that maybe you can um, get into spaces and be more comfortable with communicating and connecting with other people. I want to help you think about how to process the energy and manage the energy as an introvert when you're going into these spaces. Now, I know you're probably looking at me and thinking, Miranda, you do this all the time. You're an extrovert. I could tell you're on a podcast, okay? You're talking on a podcast. You do events, et cetera, your background in radio. But the reality is that I think because I'm this type of person and then I'm raising an introvert and then I talk to a lot of business owners, overwhelmingly, like there are way more than you think, people that are introverted that are running businesses and struggling with showing up. I've had so many conversations in so many ways that I think I've come up with some ways that can help you to manage through that. So let's get to it. So a couple of things I wanted to start with is, one, there are 3 categories that I think you can think about when you're thinking about moving into spaces as an introvert to help you to navigate, whether it's situations, whether it's being in spaces with other people, whether it's you're in the room and then that awkward moment where somebody says, all right, we're about to do this icebreaker, and everyone around the room tell us your name and something special about you. And then your anxiety kicks up. Your heart starts racing. You get a little nervous. Maybe your palms get a little sweaty. You're like, holy crap. And then you can't listen to the other people because you're so overwhelmed with wondering what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, right? So I want to give you some tips and tools that you can use to maybe help you to manage those moments. Or maybe you're invited to a party or a gathering and you're thinking about who is there and you're in your head about all these things and you're struggling. So I want to give you some tips, like I said, to help you to process those moments of peaks of anxiousness, those moments of overwhelm that you feel when those opportunities or chances arise. So, the first thing that I want you to think about is, and I'm going to click on my notes here because I want to stay on track with these, is to think about that at the basis of the anxiety, whether you're no matter where you land, but especially as an introvert, that the basis of those things usually is brought down to how you manage your fear. Okay. How you manage your fear or your anxiousness or your energy around whatever is popping up. So the first thing is really understanding that you are managing fear. And so one of the best tools to help to regulate your nervous system when everything in your body starts going left, right, up, down, zigzag is in your breath. And I know you've heard me talk about this before in previous episodes, but it is so, so, so very useful. It's such a useful free tool to activate your breath. Okay. To activate your breath and to take a really deep breath in through your nose. Do it right now. And then hold it for a count of 4. And then let it out through your mouth. Right. Super, super helpful to one, help you regulate and control whatever is physically happening with you in the first place. Because if you can't regulate what's physically going on with your body, then the rest of these things I'm about to tell you, you're not going to be able to process. You're not going to be able to implement because your body is going to be doing a jig and your brain is going to be trying to compute and communicate something to you. And it's two different conversations happening, right? So the very first thing I think when you're starting to feel anxious is to just take a really, really deep breath in, activate your breath, calm your body. Sometimes it might be helpful to get up and take a walk, to get up and step away if you're in a space where you can do that. If you can get up and take a few steps, but still implementing breath, right? Breathing in through your nose, very important. Holding it in your chest, in your stomach, and then breathing out through your mouth. Do it for a rotation of 4. 4 in, hold it for 4, and breathe out for 4. My homegirl Kia, she calls it the 4 for 4, like Wendy's. I thought that was such a cute way to remember it at my last workshop. She introduced that to the workshop. And so think about it like a 4 from 4 from Wendy's, except for this is much healthier, okay? So take a really deep breath in through your nose for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, and breathe out, okay? Now, once you have regulated your body, the next thing to think about is to think about what is the narrative that you're telling yourself about the situation, right? What is the mindset or what is the voice in your head saying to you about the situation? And how do you manage that voice? How do you say, okay, what's really happening here? Am I anxious about going over to this place? What is it that I'm really nervous about? Now that you've calmed your body, you have the opportunity to take a beat and pull back and think, what's the real fear here? Am I worried about being judged? Am I worried about sounding crazy? Am I worried about, I don't know, my capability in a thing? To identify what is the voice saying to you that's causing you anxiousness about the situation. And then the next step is to think about what is the reality. Like, what's the reality? Is this true? Is this a real thing? Am I going to sound crazy? But if I do sound crazy, then so what, right? Coming on these podcasts, doing these lives for me, there's so much to think about. Doing these, visual podcasts for me it gave me anxiety as an extrovert because I was thinking, man, now I have to think about what to wear all the time, how my face is going to look on camera. What if I say something crazy? It was just so much to think about that for me. It was overwhelmed. But then, I just said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And if something happens, then I'm going to just roll with it. And how bad is it going to be? Right? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Let me go to the worst possible scenario. I used to do that all the time with my clients. Like, whatever their fears were or whatever their biggest concern was about a thing, I would say, okay, well, let's go to that. What if it happened? So as an introvert, I know this sounds really, really like yikes, but just go with me. Go to that thing that you're scared of and say, okay, well, let's go to that moment. And if it happens, then you ask yourself, now what? What next? Okay. What next? And most of the time, what we're thinking is going to be the outcome of the situation when we actually walk through it in our heads, it's really not as bad as we think. People really don't care as much as we think. I mean, there's always going to be things, but at the end of the day, our fears usually are way bigger than they actually are in reality. And so I want to encourage you to, one, think about that, give yourself that beat to reassess, and then move forward with it after you do those things. So here are the 3 steps, just in case. I know I kind of merged them together, but the first step is to, one, regulate your energy by breath, right? So controlling your energy when you start to feel anxious, when your palms are sweating, move your body if you can. Stand up, move around, take a few breaths, get some fresh air, maybe go outside if you can do that. If not, breath work will work anywhere. So take a really deep breath in through your nose, hold it and breathe out. The second thing is to really think and identify what your fear or concern is when it comes to whatever the situation is. What is it you're really worried about? Identify, if you can, as quickly as you can, what it is. Are you worried about being judged? Are you worried about being wrong? Are you worried about failing at something? And then ask yourself. And then the third thing is to put in perspective and ask yourself the question, well, if that happened, is it the worst thing in the world? And the answer is usually it's not. If it happens, can you figure something out? Will you still be okay? Can you resolve the problem if there is a problem, or if something occurs, can you navigate your way through it? And the answer is you absolutely can. I hope those things were very helpful if you are an introverted person that is looking for a way to wrap your brain around managing that energy that rises up. But I want you to remember that everything is about managing energy. Everything. When you walk in a room, your confidence level, how you move, how you engage, it's all about managing your energy. And I want to encourage you to understand and remind you that just because you have introverted energy, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you at all. At all. As a matter of fact, I sometimes envy people who cannot talk so much when they're nervous. Because for me, when I get nervous, I sometimes talk too much, too fast, too high. And to hear it back as a person who is often recorded is way, way cringier to me than entering into a space and not saying enough. So I just want to encourage you to know that you have a superpower as an introvert, to be able to pull back, to be able to observe. And I want you to start to recreate the narrative in your head about who you are as an introvert, and learn to lean into your gifts, because they're gifts. And the reality is that we're all made completely different. We're all made different for a very good reason. And that you don't have to show up like I show up, and I don't have to show up like you show up. But at the end of the day, we can always learn something from one another. We can always learn small tools and principles and things that we can implement into our own personalities, bring into the fold of how we show up in this world, so that we can not only feel more connected, but we can just be collectively better human beings to each other and to this world. All right. I hope you got something from this podcast today. I didn't want to make it too long and drawn out. And I wanted to kind of talk from my heart instead of going from like points and notes, because I have such a heart for introverted people. I think because my son is one, and I'm often super protective of him and his personality and people who are trying to make him be a different thing than he's not. I'm super protective of him. And I'm also protective of you. I appreciate you for tuning in and joining me. And I want to remind you, if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would love to hear from you, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn? That's what I'm on. You can find me in any of those places at Miranda Joyner, Maranda Joiner. You can also check me out at my website, same first and last name. But please share this with a friend if you think this podcast was beneficial, and if you think it's going to be helpful to someone you love. Do me a favor, tell a friend, share with a friend, hit that share button. All right, until next time, I will see you on the next episode of A Lot of Like. Hey, A Lot of Like is recorded at KD Creative Arts Media Studio in Jackson, Mississippi. If you're interested in taking your video and audio quality to the next level, reach out to the people here at KD Creative Arts Media Studio. And if you want to grow and monetize your podcast and take it to the next level, this is the place to be. Visit kdcreativearts.com today.